Dale Dewar, Physicians for Global Survival. Thank you very much for ending on such a rousing note. And I'd like to make a comment and then ask a bit of a question. My comment is to remind people that in all of your envelopes, your manila envelopes, there is a pamphlet on the ICANN. As Rebecca said, it was released in 2007 at the PrepCom. It was actually first released in 2006 in the International Physicians for Prevention of Nuclear War Conference in Helsinki, when the Australians came bouncing in kangaroo suits and convinced the rest of the some 2,000 delegates that this was something that was worth supporting. In the pamphlet, there is a website at which people can go to sign the ICANN, support ICANN. There is also, if you follow through with it, an excellent short, less than 10-minute video that young people love and older people don't love so much because it's very fast. A very speedy description of the state of the world according from the nuclear weapons and number of nuclear weapons and what we need to do to get rid of them. And young people seem to really like that video. It can be downloaded and used. There are two physicians in our group here, in the room here, I know, who are members of Physicians for Global Survival and Torontonians. Could I certainly approach either Dr. Barbara Burkett, who is up here behind me, I think, or was, and Dr. Vinay Jindlal over on the far side. Then, of course, if you happen to know anyone who is an Order of Canada and may not have signed the Nuclear Weapons Convention that Murray Thompson is carrying around, please give the names to Murray and let's utilize that powerful move of people. And then my question is from the speakers today, and that includes Chris and earlier, one gets a little bit of a sense of discouragement at the number of steps we need to go through at the United Nations level in order to get a verifiable nuclear weapons convention. My sense is that it's going to happen, though, and it's going to happen coming at us sideways, a little bit like the destruction of the Berlin Wall or the end of apartheid in South Africa, where we worked long and hard to get these things to happen, but they came at us sideways. We were not prepared for either of those. And I'm wondering if you have any comments on that and how we can prepare for that if that so happens.
Any of the speakers, please.
Thank you. I think that's a very good question. And the notion that we come at things sideways resonates with me. I think progress unfolds in mysterious ways, and we're often surprised by things that are much better than we feared they would be. To wit, I don't think anyone knew how we were going to get out of the Cold War alive. And we did, but it was kind of beyond imagination, and it came as an utter surprise to all the highly paid analysts paid to develop good future forecasts. So that notion of things arriving in ways that you don't expect and progress being achieved in ways that you don't expect, and sometimes very rapidly, I agree with you entirely. And I think in my gut that we are actually, what's in prospect is much more positive than what we fear internationally, generally, and with respect to the issues that we're discussing. But that's a gut instinct more than a rational analysis. So that's a general response. With respect to the achievement of a convention, I feared when I was speaking that I may have been misunderstood. I am an abolitionist. I think that a convention is going to be required, is required. But we are all abolitionists. It's in the NPT, with the exception of Israel, India, and Pakistan, now North Korea. We are all committed to general disarmament and the elimination of nuclear weapons. But that's a promise. It's an ideal. I think the problem is that so many promises have been made and left unkept for so long. If you want to know why people are cynical, it's because they witness constant hypocrisy. Again, the CTBT is an old promise. And the reason I emphasized it is that with respect to this notion that we've got plenty of promises, thank you, let's keep some. Really, I mean, it's essential. We don't need more promises. We don't need more elaborate promises. We need to keep some promises. And what's the promise to be kept? It's no mystery. It's the test ban. It always has been. It truly has. If you ask, all right, I'm on your side, what's the next step? What do you want to do? The answer is the test ban, always has been. And in fact, talking about hypocrisy, that promise was made. Put yourself in Canada's shoes. Put yourself in a non-NATO protected shoes, and look at and try not to be cynical. On the eve of the 1995 conference to extend the NPT, suddenly gets negotiated a quite satisfactory CTBT, and it comes with an assurance of verificability. It can be verified. 15 years later, we still don't have it. And now we hear that, no, we don't think the charge will be made in Washington for ratification before the NPT. Well, fair enough. It'd be better not to lose it. But that's 15 years of a promise unkept. We don't need more promises. I mean, that would be the basic thrust of an attack on cynicism. We've heard promises all this time, and they haven't been kept. So that's why I emphasize the test ban. It can be done. It would be a heartening, a major historic achievement, but I do believe it can be done. And I don't believe that a convention can be done now. It's a good thing. I wouldn't argue against it. I'm persuaded. But in terms of focus and political will and action required now, and the promise that needs to be kept now, and the step that needs to be taken now, it's no mystery. It's the test ban. So it's in that sense that I was emphasizing its importance.
Doug, would you care to? No? Okay. Phyllis is next, please. Phyllis Creighton.
I want to urge moral passion. I think it was incredible how many people around the world came out for the 350 rally, more than ever before in history, because there was a sense of urgency. We've been told we have from now to maybe 2016 to make a real difference on carbon emissions. Injecting a sense of urgency, injecting a sense of moral passion into it. And I've been told by my member of parliament, we don't hear much moral passion on the Hill, keep it up. If you're trying to move people, then you have to be blunt. And I think we need to become quite aggressive. I asked Trevor Finlay, is there any reason, technical, why we couldn't get rid of nuclear weapons by 2020? Can the technical, he said, it's a matter of funds. We need the funding to do the work that will tell us exactly what the steps are in verification. And therefore what we have to say is, why not? Why not now? Why set your horizon so much further? What is the military utility of nuclear weapons? I once asked the Department of Foreign Affairs, I proposed, you hold a conference on what is the military utility of nuclear weapons. Tell me. No response. But I think that we need to be much more direct and emotional and passionate. We need to speak about those unspeakable horrors we showed you pictures of. We need to tell young people about this. We need to show them the movies. We need to encourage them, because it is the strong desire of human beings to live and to have community and to bond with each other that will save us.
Thank you. Gentleman at the mic. No, I'm sorry. Your turn will be later. Oh, are you standing up for the mic? Okay, go ahead.
Anton Wagner, Toronto Hiroshima Day Coalition. Rebecca Johnson referred to the tactic of using acts of peaceful civil disobedience as a tactic of energizing grassroots support, particularly among young people, as a way of capturing media attention, which we never get, and as a way of breaking through the psychic numbness that Doug Roche referred to. So my question is it time now to change our tactics and do more than just write letters to our elected politicians?
Thank you. Please, your turn is next. Yes.
The whole business of the strategy and how do we approach the public or publics, because actually the public is often too broad a term. There are several connections which maybe we haven't made yet, some dots to connect, and maybe we need a meta strategy. On one hand, several people have touched on the issue of now how we can connect to the issue of climatic change and the damage to the environment. That can be extended a bit further with some discussions about whether or not we're headed into a sixth great extinction driven by human abuse of the planet's environment. But there's some other issues too. When Senator Roche, you speak about, and others, crime against humanity. Right now there are some very high profile trials to do with crimes against humanity and things related to, if not technically, genocide. And those are some dots then which we could connect with other groups which are mobilizing. An intermediate strategy then to connect with those who are reaching the public. At the same time, while I don't think there's as much outrage as many of us would like to see, the way that the so-called war on terror was conducted with the abuse of human rights and the type of exceptionalism for American foreign policy, there's a great deal of apprehension about what's going on with Iran and North Korea. And I think we can advance arguments that whether or not it would be the use of nuclear weapons by Iran, North Korea, rogue state, or our own countries, the good guys, that the net effect would be back to, in effect, mass murder, collateral damage on a scale which humanity hasn't seen before. So I think that there are other issues out there, other dots, which we can connect with other groups, and that an intermediate strategy is connecting those dots to make for a greater mobilization.
Thank you. Walter Dorn.
Walter Dorn from Canadian Pugwash. This has been a fantastic session, and Chris Westdal gave us a thoughtful, eloquent, insightful speech, and Doug Roche with this rousing and passionate speech with our heartfelt thanks for being such a super example of commitment for us. Point I want to discuss is the implementation and entry into force of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Chris, you spoke about the challenge of getting the ratification in Washington. But it seems to me that a lot of the challenge of the CTBT is in this treaty itself, that it provided this provision in 1996 that it had to be ratified by the 44 countries, of which at least one of them, and probably 3 of them, said they would never ratify it. So it sort of put in a block of its own entry into force. India was a country saying, we'd never ratify that treaty. So what kind of creative solution do we get? And when it was passed in 1996 and signed, I was asking the question. They said, well, if we run into a roadblock, we'll find some sort of way to get an amendment to the treaty, and then we can then have it enter into force. But right now, the answer that I'm getting when I'm asking the people at CTBTO is, until the treaty is in force, it can't be amended. So what's the diplomatic solution, knowing that it's still of tremendous value because it's creating a new international norm, which is probably even more important than the legality of entry into force. But what can we do on the legal side to be able to get that treaty as international law?
Doug, Chris?
Well, I'm no expert on the current legal prospects for ratification. I know the issue that you're talking about, that those key ratifications are required, and you do have countries that have announced that they have no intention of ratifying. Prior to the NPT meeting in 2000, France and China and some other countries were quite openly reluctant and adamant that they would not endorse many of those 13 steps that were endorsed. I cite that because if you ask how this can happen diplomatically, I would reply diplomatically and politically rather than legally. It can happen with a consensus by momentum. Again, I don't mean that to be a simplistic phrase, but that's what's happened in 2000. That's how people who have announced will never do that find themselves doing it. You have to identify a common good. And I have very vivid memories of the basement of the UN on that night in 2000. And it was a very crowded room, and there was a palpable sense that we were within reach of something that was really very good for everyone. And when, again, you need the powerful on board, when the Americans led, and this was Clinton, and this was Tom Graham, and this was Norm Wolfe, this was the team before Bush, when they led, others could not say no. There were representatives literally at the table on the phone to their capitals explaining, look, we're going to end up being the only country in this room saying no to a common good. We don't want to say no to a common good. We'd love to vote against this thing. We announced we were going to vote against this thing, but we can't have a headline saying France or X or India or Pakistan refuses to and will destroy and deny a common good. That's the pressure of it, politically and diplomatically, and it can work. And multilaterally, that kind of momentum actually makes multilateralism quite dramatic. There are many moments in multilateralism that are not dramatic, but that was a dramatic evening. Now, diplomatically and politically, I think that can all work. Legally, I just say, I think one of the beauties of the test ban is that we already have a test ban negotiated. It's not enforced, not ratified. There is a moratorium already working. And as more and more countries ratify, more and more pressure will build on the outliers and the holdouts. And in the end, whether or not they sign or not, if they don't test, if testing becomes simply an unacceptable thing to do in the world, and that's when we talk about public opinion. Testing has got to be a disgraceful thing to do, a highly inappropriate thing to do. Now, we're a long way from there. The Indians and the Pakistanis both applauded when they saw an underground test happen, and I'm sure it was a big event in North Korea too. So we're not there yet. But if there were a public outcry, remember the last French test, they didn't earn the French any credit. Those tests have got to be seen as something that civilized people don't do. And so I can see a process more diplomatic and political than legal, leading to an effective test ban even before that treaty is ratified. So I would put the announcements of some countries that they don't intend to do it in that context, that in the right circumstances, they won't have any choice because they do not want to be identified, and people care about world public opinion. They do not want to be identified and damned as deniers of common good. And boy, a test ban would be good. And a lot of people know and feel that it would be good. That's the context in which I would say.
Thank you, Chris. Doug, please.
Yeah. I just want to give a few short responses before my poor old mind loses track of some of the questions that were raised. First, on the Nuclear Weapons Convention, it's not a question of it being achieved immediately. Of course, it cannot be achieved right away. The Mayors for Peace is aiming for 2020. The important issue is to get it on the table, to begin the active diplomatic and political dialogue about it, to further deepen the credibility of the total elimination of nuclear weapons via a phased process on a timetable. So that's what we're talking about in affirming the strength and the credibility of the Nuclear Weapons Convention, which, as I said earlier, would be a visible intent to connect ongoing steps to the goal. Secondly, on the writing letters, should we change tactics from writing letters? Well, I don't know. There's all sorts of ways to manifest our opinion. I was part, and I'm sure there are people in the room also, of the million march in 1982 from Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza to Central Park in New York at the time of the Second Special Session on Disarmament, when, of course, the issue was up in the headlines and people were disturbed about the deployment of new nuclear weapons going into Europe. I'm not suggesting, I wish I could, that we got a million march today for all the reasons that I guess we're pretty familiar with. Might be pretty hard to do. However, manifesting our concern through protest, peaceful, legitimate, lawful protest, is not a bad idea. Certainly a doable form of protest is letters. And as an operating politician for a long time, I can tell you that letters do count. I'm not particularly opposed to form letters. I mean, you know, I wouldn't argue against it, but I don't think they do that much. It does take an individual short letter. And people say, well, I'm not an expert. You see, we have been bamboozled by these people, and we got a little bit of it this morning, I have to say, frankly, that, about the arcane terminologies of all this stuff. I mean, no wonder people say, oh, leave it to the experts. You cannot leave it to the experts. So I come now to my third point answer in this round. I called earlier for simplifying of the message. By that I did not mean to become into simplification. I only meant to get the message into a coherent way. And here's how I see nuclear weapons. They are a violation of human rights. We have had Jonathan Schell last night talked about, you know, maybe getting closer to the environmental movement, and I'm all for that, because after all, the two great issues of the 21st century are global warming and the abolition of nuclear weapons, and so there is an affinity between the two issues. But there is a very deep-rooted connection between the abolition of nuclear weapons and the human rights movement. And human rights in all their details coming down the track as a result of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the covenants on economic and social and political and civil rights. And there is a third wave of rights coming too, like the right to peace, which has been articulated by the United Nations many years ago, but it keeps getting swept aside by the events of the day and the resurgence of militarism, unhappily taking place in our own country at this time. So the way to speak about nuclear weapons that connects to people, I think, is to make the direct connection with human rights. It is incompatible, it is incoherent to have weapons of mass destruction spreading in a world that is trying to affirm human rights in all their dimensions. And I think that's something that people can understand. The single greatest lesson I learned as a politician in my career was that governments will always respond to something when it's happened, a problem that's happened, and we have to do something about it. We here are trying to prevent a problem from happening, because the happening of that problem will be so terrible, it'll shut down all sorts of systems of life and everything. It'll take an hour just to describe everything that will happen if we ever do have a nuclear occurrence. Then you're going to get government attention, to be sure. What we're trying to do, we have to remember this, we have to kind of reinforce our own strength, that we are trying to anticipate or head off the horrors by action now before the event. And I say again, connecting that in people's minds with the advancement of human rights, that I believe that I have the right to live in a world where I'm not going to be bombed out of existence, and so do you, and so do the people of every country in the world. So, universality.